For decades, we have lived under its shadow, a force born of science, capable of both ultimate destruction and infinite power. It's a technology woven with both monumental triumphs and terrifying disasters. This is the timeline of nuclear power and the story of its dramatic history. Let's begin with a flash of light. In the beginning, there was the atom, which scientists discovered was glowing all on its own. This is how the story started, with a time lapse of one of the biggest power plants ever built. But this time lapse is not of our time. It's yours. This is how we live now. And now let us travel back in time to the dark days of the 1970s, when oil price hikes, caused by wars in the Middle East, sent shockwaves around the world. Back then, most countries were heavily reliant on fossil fuels, and when those supplies started to dwindle, they began looking for alternatives. So let's start our journey into the past with the beginnings of atomic science. Here are some old photos of the pioneers of atomic science. Marie Skłodowska-Curie, who was born in Poland but moved to Paris, where she met her husband Pierre, a fellow scientist. Together they uncovered the secrets of radioactivity. Then here's Albert Einstein, the man whose theory of special relativity changed our understanding of space and time, though he would later become famous for his opposition to nuclear weapons. It was his equation E equals mc squared that provided the theoretical basis for nuclear energy. Now let's animate how nuclear fission works, the splitting of an atom to release its energy. Here's a simplified version of what happens when a neutron strikes a uranium atom. The atom splits into two smaller ones, releasing even more neutrons that go on to split more atoms, and so on, releasing huge amounts of energy. And now let's look at some archival footage of scientists in a lab. These men were part of the Manhattan Project, a top-secret US government initiative during World War II. They raced against the Germans to develop the first nuclear weapon. And these photos show Enrico Fermi and his team at the University of Chicago. On December 2, 1942, they successfully built the first nuclear reactor, nicknamed Chicago Pile 1, which generated enough heat to raise the temperature of its surroundings. Now let's zoom in on this schematic of the Chicago Pile 1 reactor. We can see the various components, such as the graphite moderator, the experimental face, and the control rods. It might look complicated, but it's just a pile of stuff thrown together to see if it works. And it did. In 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower addressed the nation about the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. He coined the phrase atoms for peace. Here is an animated graphic of an atom with the words atoms for peace written inside it. Let's look at some photos of the Nautilus, the first nuclear-powered ship commissioned by the US Navy. It was followed by many other nuclear-powered vessels. That became an important part of the Navy's fleet. Next up, we have the commercial era. Now we'll look at some photos of the world's first nuclear power plant, the Obninsk plant in the USSR. It began operating in 1954 and had a capacity of 5 megawatts, enough to power a small town. Here are some photos of the Calder Hall plant in the UK, the first fully licensed nuclear power station in Western Europe. It began generating electricity in 1966 and was a significant achievement for the British nuclear industry. To show how quickly nuclear power was growing, here's a timeline graphic. In 1954, only one reactor was under construction, but by 1974, there were 86. However, that was nothing compared to the following year, when 139 reactors were under construction. Now let us look at some photos of large-scale construction sites with workers busy at work, building more nuclear power plants. On March 28, 1979, an accident occurred at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Here are some news headlines and photos from the time. Let's animate how this happened. First, a valve in the plant's cooling system failed to close, allowing the water in the reactor core to overheat and turn into steam. The steam caused a buildup of pressure in the core, which melted through the bottom of the vessel. Fortunately, the backup system kicked in before the molten material reached the ground, preventing a full meltdown. Still, this was the worst nuclear accident in US history. Here is a graph that shows how the 3 Mile Island accident affected the future of nuclear power in the United States. After the accident, the rate of new plant construction dropped dramatically. On April 26, 1986, a catastrophic accident occurred at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, then part of the Soviet Union. Let's look at some archival footage of the Chernobyl reactor on fire. The explosion was caused by a power surge in the reactor core, which led to a loss of coolant. This resulted in a partial meltdown of the fuel rods, and the subsequent fire released large amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Here's a map of Europe showing the spread of the radioactive cloud after the Chernobyl accident. The nearby city of Pripyat was evacuated and has since become a ghost town. Here's a wide shot of the abandoned Pripyat ghost town with overgrown buildings and empty streets. Here are some close-up shots of dosimeters, devices used to measure radiation, and signs warning of high levels of radiation. The Chernobyl accident is considered the worst nuclear disaster in history. On March 11, 2011, a powerful earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, followed by a massive tsunami. This event was one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded in human history. Here's some news footage of the earthquake and tsunami. The tsunami waves hit the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, causing a nuclear accident. Let's animate how this happened. The plant was flooded and a cooling system failed, leading to a partial meltdown of the fuel rods. Hydrogen explosions vented radioactive material into the air. Here are some news photos of the evacuated towns and people fleeing the area. Many had to abandon their homes and belongings, and some never returned. Here's a world map with countries showing a phase out of nuclear power. Several European nations have announced plans to end nuclear power production over the next few decades. Here's a shot of the ruined plant. In the distance, the sea can be seen. The Fukushima nuclear accident is the second worst nuclear disaster in history. But now let's move on to the nuclear resurgence. With more and more countries aiming to decarbonize their economies, nuclear power is having a moment in the sun again. Here are some AI-generated images of next-generation reactors, smaller and safer than those of the past. Here's some CGI visuals of small modular reactors, another promising development in nuclear technology. These are smaller, more efficient reactors that can be mass-produced and assembled on an assembly line. Here are some shots of clean, modern nuclear plants in China and France, showcasing how far the technology has come in recent years. Here's a montage of people working in energy labs, developing new technologies to provide us with a cleaner future. We hope you enjoyed this quick overview of the history of nuclear power from its humble beginnings to the present day. What do you think of the future of nuclear power? Will it play a big role in the coming decades? Let us know in the comments below. That's all for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.